On the line with us is our buddy Sabrina Hake, the federal trial attorney, 20-plus years, specializing in First and 14th Amendment defense cases, contributor to numerous law journals and publications, including the Chicago Tribune. But most consequentially, Sabrina writes a newsletter over on Substack. It's called The Hake Take. H-A-A-K-E is how she spells her last name. The actual URL is sabrinahake.substack.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. It's really worth reading. And Sabrina, welcome. And Hake_Sabrina is her Twitter handle. Sabrina, thanks so much for dropping by today. I was intrigued by the piece that you published titled, "Our Falling IQ Shows in the Polls." Lay out the premise of this article for us.
Okay, nice to be here, Tom. And actually, Frederick Douglass is a perfect entree to this segment because he was self-taught at a time when there were no electronic devices. Lincoln the same way, two of the most brilliant men we've ever had. Self-taught and kind of make the point that I'm going to make today. So starting in about 1930, social researchers have tracked the IQ level of Americans with a big enough sample of the population that we can draw some conclusions from it. And from 1930 until this last period that I'm going to talk to you about, our IQs, our national IQs, have risen significantly every decade from 3 to 5 points per decade. Unfortunately, starting in about 2006 through 2018, instead of going up every year slightly, 3 to 5 is not slight, but it's significant over time, we have now started to show a decline, which is concerning on many levels. But between 2006 and 2018, the researchers at Northwestern University and the University of Oregon found evidence of a complete reversal in intelligence. So the Flynn effect, which was showing our increase over time, has now not just plateaued, but started to go in reverse, which is alarming for a lot of reasons. Scores in 3 of the 4 broad domains of intelligence, including logic, vocabulary, and visual and mathematical problem solving, showed a significant decline. And of course, these are averages. So in some areas of the country, probably it's a more significant decline. So we're going from 5% increase per decade, now showing a 2 to 3% decline, which for some people is going to be, even more, 10 to 15%, which is alarming for national security purposes. As you know, Tom, you've written about it many times, the influence of China and Russia trying to manipulate our low information voters. And getting a lot of traction, unfortunately, with the MAGA base. And it's really not about politics, it's about national security. So the intellect, the IQ that has been tracked for since 1930s is going down, but also the national assessment testing for students is showing a dramatic decrease. Last year, in 2023, the national assessment of 13-year-olds showed our lowest test scores in decades in math and reading. And this way predates. The trend started years before COVID. So it's not a COVID phenomenon. It's a drop in our intellect across the board, across ages, and including grades. So what's causing it? I mean, people can point to diets and families, all kinds of...
Legalized pot, some people have suggested. But this does seem to have started around the same time that the teenage mental health crisis started, and that seems to be tied to social media.
Exactly. So about 2000 is the year when social researchers showed that a majority of Americans now had access to broadband access and had computer access in their home. And it's strongly correlates with when our intellect started taking a downturn. And it links up with other social research where they have looked at longitudinal studies and observational studies about children from ages of 0 to 3, the most formative years. Kids that are exposed to more television and more social stimulation, what they're calling it now excessive sensory stimulation, there's a direct correlation and probably causation between exposure to TV and loud noises and a decline in cognitive development. So those children who have the higher cohorts of noise and being put in front of a TV, being put in front of a loud computer screen all day, they are showing a decline in the ability to think logically, and they're showing a decline in the ability to hold attention. If you look at commercials for Alzheimer's and all kinds of dementia-related diseases that are being reported, the doctors tell you that if you don't exercise your brain, it's a muscle. It will atrophy, just like if you use a wheelchair and you don't need it. Your legs will atrophy. Your muscles atrophy if you don't use them. The brain evidently is the same. So when you put your kid down in front of a loud TV or even put them in front of a computer screen, you think you may be increasing their intellect, but you're actually degrading their intellect, their cognitive abilities, and their ability to pay attention long term. There's even been a rise correlated with ADHD and attention deficit disorders among all ages of population, depending on how much they have been watching loud stimulation, including loud noise. The same thing happens with, even if it's not a visual, if you're hearing excessive noises at home, television, personal devices, teenagers wearing these loud headphones, they're actually hurting themselves cognitively too, because that is also showing not just a relationship between mental health, but also a cognitive decline, which is very concerning because it's affecting everything, affects our national security, and it's affecting our politics. And I talk a little bit in the articles, both on the Substack and with Raw Story. Shout out to Raw Story for publishing me regularly. I talk a little bit about the partisan correlation. This is not anything to feel superior over. It's something that's very concerning, that the Republicans are holding a majority of the very lower educated states. Something like they represent about 65%, I think I quoted. And then the Democrats have something like 78% representation for the more educated cohorts. And it's not a good news. This dichotomy is not good, because we need all of our population to be as educated and as well informed as possible, because as you know, less informed and less cognitively astute people are easier to manipulate. Right. Not just by foreign actors, but by what's going on domestically. I mean, half of the country that is looking at the polls is going to scratch at our heads and going, what on earth is happening? How can half the country be supporting someone that is hurting their interests? Someone who looks to the rest of us like a charlatan and a con man is now manipulating these people, taking their money and doing all kinds of things that will hurt them long run, and they don't seem to get it. So we need to figure out what to do about it.
Right. So back in the 1930s, there was a minor moral panic hysteria, people suggesting that radio was going to destroy the ability of people to read, because there were all these, radio dramas were a big thing in the 1930s, and people were listening to the radio instead of reading novels. That didn't materialize. In fact, people continued to get smarter decade after decade. Television became ubiquitous in the late 50s, and by 1965, I think it was the year, more than 95% of American households had a television in them. And that didn't, and again, it was predicted that was going to destroy our intellect, but it didn't. But Facebook hit the scene in a big way in the last, the last years of the 1990s or the early years of the 2000s? And
right. Well, what I read was in 2007 is when the majority of people started having access to broadband internet and using more social media.
Right. So it seems like social media might be the singular culprit here.
But you also have to look at the content. You're not, what you're talking about with the radio is true, but look at the content of that programming. If you go and listen to a radio station, any program that's been recorded from the 40s and the 50s, and I'd say into the 60s, the content is much more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the television. Go back and watch some movies that were made in the 40s and the 50s. The dialogue is a lot more complex. The plots are more complex. Now it's loud, it's big, bright colors, it's highly manipulative, it's in your face. And because we're feeding our brains so much easy stimulation, we're losing the muscle that processes logic and what enables us to do critical thinking. If you give too much sweet crap to your kid, they're not going to want the nutritious food. It's the same thing with our brain. If we're giving it easy, bright lights, easy stimulation, loud noises, this pablum that you see on TV half the time, we lose the ability to think. So I think that the 40s and the 50s, the radio station, the TV didn't have the effect that it's having now because the programming has changed so much. It's crap for the most part now. And social media is more easy crap. It's all videos, mindless stuff that's addicting and fun to watch. but we're losing the ability to think, and it's correlating directly with our decline in intellect and IQ and reading and math comprehension. So at least we're talking about reducing the use of cell phones in schools. We're going to, I think it's...
There you go. That's an important one. The article is Our Falling IQ shows in the polls over at sabrinahake.substack.com, Hake's Take. Sabrina, thank you for dropping by.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 16 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
By Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language, as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849, and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors. Such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life. Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikoju spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history. Not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
174 days to the election. We got a lot to talk about today. Which of the nobody knew at the time events will it be this November? I'll get into that in just a moment. Also, President Biden is hiking tariffs and protecting America. This is a good news story. I'll tell you about that. Outside conservative groups are buying Senate seats in battleground states. Citizens United strikes again and democracy suffers. We'll get into that in just a moment. And the Alabama Mercedes workers begin their UAW vote this week. So, a lot going on in the first hour here to talk about. And in the second hour of our program, why are Louisiana Republicans voting on the side of child rapists rather than their victims? I don't mean children who are rapists. I mean rapists who target children. Also, Tennessee, who are being apparently supported by Republicans in Louisiana. A Tennessee woman was denied an abortion after her fetus's brain was not attached. She has, as a consequence of this, lost her ability to have children. She's quite upset. She's slamming the Republicans in Tennessee. Also, in the second hour, why are we allowing ultra-processed food corporations to cram junk food down our children's throats? Interesting op-ed by Ralph Nader and some fascinating statistics and information along with it. I'll share that with you in the second hour of the program. In the third hour of our program, the Republican Party is lying about states' rights. Why does that matter? We'll talk about that. Also, does Putin's new defense minister shakeup mean that he's planning a long confrontation with the West? Or at the very least, a long war with Ukraine? We'll talk about that as well in the third hour of the program. No guests today, just you and me and these news stories. A lot to talk about. My op-ed today at HartmannReport.com and my daily take, my opening rant here for the program, is titled, "Which, quote, nobody knew at the time, end quote, will it be this November?" And what I'm talking about here is that the Republican Party's favorite phrase when it comes to presidential politics appears to be, well, nobody knew at the time. You know, once a president is sworn into office, regardless of how much evidence there might be that crimes and irregularities committed to get him there, both the press and the electorate just seem to want to ignore the evidence and move along. I mean, after all, there's never been a successfully contested presidency in American history, or presidential election, which is why, I'm quite confident the Republican Party will again try to get away with their crimes against electoral democracy this fall. The big question for America is going to be, what did we miss that we should have known at the time? Now, we have seen this movie before. You'll recall when Richard Nixon ran against incumbent Vice President Hubert Humphrey in 1968, nobody knew at the time that Nixon's campaign had reached out to the South Vietnamese leadership and promised to make them rich if they just sabotaged the peace deal that they had agreed to with Lyndon Johnson just months earlier. A week before the election, LBJ discussed it with Senator Everett Dirksen, who said, "This is treason." But both men took this to their graves. It wasn't until, 10, 15 years ago, when the Johnson Library published the recordings of the phone conversations, that we learned that Nixon had committed treason to become president in 1968. Similarly, when Ronald Reagan ran against Jimmy Carter, nobody knew at the time that Reagan's campaign had cut a deal with the mullahs of Iran to hold the hostages, making Carter appear fatally weak and politically impotent. We didn't learn about Reagan's treason until the then president of Iran, Abdul Hassan Bani Sadr, immigrated to the United States, wrote a 2013 article for the Christian Science Monitor in which he laid out the plot. And then that story was corroborated just last year in the New York Times by Texas's former Lieutenant Governor Ben Barnes, who'd been on the trip to Paris on behalf of the Reagan campaign to cut the deal with the Iranians. In the 2000 election, when that recount was ordered by the Florida Supreme Court and halted by 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, handing the White House to George W. Bush with a disputed 537 votes, nobody knew at the time that Florida Governor Jeb Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, had commissioned a huge purge of voters using a list of Texas felons that was 68% black and Hispanic. Harris did this because the national pool of black and Hispanic names is relatively small. So black felons in Texas with names like Jim Washington or Jose Gonzalez are extremely likely to have similarly named counterparts in any state with large black and Hispanic populations like Florida. Thus, when those Texas names were compared via a loose match, Harris didn't require a middle name match or a birthday match. With Florida voters' names, disproportionate numbers of black and Hispanic Florida voters got identified as, these are Texas felons who must have moved to Florida. And they got thrown off the voting rolls. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights noted, and I quote, 14.4% of Florida's black voters cast ballots that were rejected. This compares with approximately 1.6% of non-black Florida voters who did not have their presidential votes counted. In the state's largest county, Miami-Dade, more than 65% of the names on the purge list were African Americans, who represent only 20.4% of the Florida population. So, we didn't know when George W. Bush, quote, won the election, that his brother had thrown 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida just 6 months earlier. Well, now we know, George W. Bush was an illegitimate president. Ronald Reagan was an illegitimate president. Richard Nixon was an illegitimate president. Nixon and Reagan committed treason to win. George W. Bush just committed good old-fashioned election fraud. And then when Donald Trump was certified the winner of the 2016 election, nobody knew at the time that Russia had illegally poured millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of man-hours into targeting swing state voters who had been identified by the RNC, whose names were handed off to Russian intelligence by Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. When Robert Mueller's FBI team determined that that crime put Trump in the White House, and that Trump had personally intervened in investigations 10 separate times in ways that could be prosecuted for criminal obstruction of justice, Bill Barr kept the news from America until the story had largely faded from the headlines. So what's it going to be this fall? What's going to be the little trick that the Republicans play, or the big trick? Is it going to be interference in foreign affairs? Is it going to be, foreign allies helping out, like Russia helping Trump in 2016? Is it, what's it going to be? Well, we've got some clues. First off, with the blessing of 5 Republicans on the 2018 Supreme Court, Republican-controlled states with large Black and Hispanic populations are purging voter rolls like there's no tomorrow. Just between 2020 and 2022, 2 years, fully 19,260,000 Americans, 8.5% of all registered voters, were purged. And the purge rate in red states is 40% higher than in blue states. And we won't know the purge numbers until after the election. So there's that. The Republican Party right now is trying to organize an army of 100,000 so-called poll watchers who are going to, election integrity people, who are going to challenge suspicious-looking people who might show up at the polls to vote, and who are going to be challenging the match of the signatures on mail-in ballots coming out of blue parts of the states. So there's that. Republican officials at the state level, all the way up to the U.S. Senate, are refusing to say whether they'll accept or certify the results of an election this fall if Trump loses. Multiple members of Congress have asserted that only the House of Representatives should decide the election, which of course would throw that to Trump. In multiple states, Republicans have passed laws allowing them to manipulate and change the location of polling places, criminalize voter registration drives, replace Democratic and nonpartisan election officials with partisan GOP hacks, and in Georgia and Arizona, throw out ballots from entire precincts. The Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt noted for The Atlantic, quote, throwing out thousands of ballots in rival strongholds may be profoundly anti-democratic, but it is technically legal. And Republicans in several states now have a powerful stick with which to enforce such practices. Right. Then there's also, historically, when politicians get caught cheating, that kills their political chances. But since 2016, and in a big way since 2020, when Republicans are caught cheating, they actually get rewarded by their voters rather than punished. So there's that. Saudi Arabia and Russia, both allies of Trump, have cut oil production by more than 1.4 million barrels a day to drive up gas prices leading up to the November election, just like they did during that dress rehearsal in 2022. Remember those? History shows that when gas prices spike over $5 or $6 a gallon, it'll have a huge impact on the election. So there's that. And then Russia fielded a small army of online trolls to assist Trump's efforts in 2016 and 2020. Expect the same this November, except this time, according to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, China is also getting into the act on the Republican Party's behalf. And finally, Benjamin Netanyahu defied Obama when he was engaged in delicate negotiations with Iran, visiting the U.S. and addressing Congress at the invitation of Republicans. He's expected to do the same slap-in-the-face gesture against Biden this fall, along with defying the president's wish that Israel minimize civilian casualties in Gaza. Netanyahu will do anything he can to ensure Trump gets back into office, if for no other reason than keeping himself out of prison. 1 minute. So demoralizing young progressive voters will almost certainly be at the top Netanyahu's list. But these are just the things we know about right now. What are the things we don't know about? Is there anything on your mind? Can you think of something that I've missed here? What will it be that we will look back on if Donald Trump becomes president this November and is sworn in January? A year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what will be the thing that we look back on and say, oh, that's how he stole the election? I offered some suggestions. What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden is getting the business of America done. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, man, what the hell is wrong with the Democratic Party, man?
What do you mean?
They got these people, these people down there supporting Donald Trump. They from other states. We got 3 firebrand progressive Democrats in New York State. We got Jamal Bowman, Ocasio-Cortez, and I called all 3 of them, and my brother Yusef Shalom. I called all 3 of them, and I said, listen, how is it nobody is going down to that courthouse? They got cameras all out there and making a stand for our legal system.
Oh, that's a good point, Tyrone. That's a great point.
What the hell? What the hell is wrong with y'all? How y'all not y'all don't have to burn the camera. The cameras are all down there.
Yeah.
How y'all not down there saying, listen, they holding this man responsible for cheating the last election, for cheating and winning the last election, for using his money and power to take our government hostage. And none of you people are down there, and I don't for the life of me, I can't understand why nobody. I ain't just talking about New York. I'm talking about Hakeem Jeffrey. It's the minority leader.
Yeah.
Brooklyn. Dude, how is it nobody is going down there and saying, listen, we got these people from Alabama. You understand?
I think probably the way they're thinking, Tyrone, is, Trump is claiming that this is all about politics and it's all political, so we're not going to make it look like it actually is. But I agree with you. I think you're a better political scientist than any of these politicians.
Man, listen, this is why we get our ass kicked, because Republicans are willing to break an egg to make an omelet.
Yeah.
We want an omelet, but we don't want to break a damn egg. Dude, we need to we need to step into because these people they're not playing with us.
Yeah.
And we want to stay back and be above the fray. Dude,
you're right. It's time to play hardball.
Operating like this.
It's time to play hardball.
They need to go down there, jump in front of a camera. Jamal Bowman did it once against Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah. And he went down there and blasted her out. They need to go down there and say, listen, this is about our legal system, holding a criminal accountable for what he did.
Yeah.
You just say that it's political. Y'all come out here, leave your states that is catching hell. Alabama, how the hell I'm just like, we got too many superstars.
Oh, and the amazing thing, here's the amazing thing, Tyrone. You've got Mike Johnson, whose claim to fame is that he's a fundamentalist Christian, that he believes he's this generation's Moses, who was called by God to leadership. And he goes to defend a convicted rapist who is being accused of paying off a porn star for having sex with him.
There's no bottom. There's no bottom to these people.
There isn't.
There's no bottom
You're
to
right.
them.
There's no shame.
We need to know what we're dealing with. We understand. Okay, we understand you want to protect the rapist and the cheater and the liar. Okay, that's your thing. But guess what? We don't want to protect that.
Right.
We're going to stand up against it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
that's
brilliant.
mad at what you want.
Jamal Bowman should be down there. He should be. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
We got superstars, man.
We do.
Chuck Schumer. We got people here in New York, and they should be standing up for our legal system.
I agree. Tyrone, thank you. That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. Genius. Thank you. 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. Welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. I mentioned Joe Biden is getting things done. This is amazing. As you know, those of you who have listened to the program over the last 21 years, I am a big advocate of protectionism, of economic protectionism, of tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade. I think countries should well, I think America, but I think generally this is true of every country in the world. Countries should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. We should be able to, you know, if China cut us off tomorrow, we would be in a world of hurt. I mean, you know, every Walmart in America would be empty in a week. You wouldn't be able to buy half, you know, literally, you know, 3/4 of the stuff that we buy right now if China cut us off. And China is threatening a war with us over Taiwan. So anyhow, Joe Biden just slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese-made cars, electric vehicles. Why? Because they're made with slave labor. They're heavily subsidized by the Chinese market. China is only capable of selling right now around 20 to 23 million electric cars a year in their own domestic market. But they're manufacturing over 30 million because, you know, they're following Alexander Hamilton's advice to George Washington, become an exporting powerhouse. Before Ronald Reagan came into office and imposed neoliberalism on America, we sold things all over the world. You know, American toasters, American televisions, American computers, American cars, American clothing. These were sold literally, they were sold in Europe, they were sold in Africa, they were sold in Asia, they were sold in South and Central America, Australia, all over the world. American goods were the pinnacle, the best you could get. And then, you know, Reagan with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and then George Herbert Walker Bush negotiating NAFTA, which then Bill Clinton signed into law. You know, the three of them basically just blew a hole in American manufacturing. 20,000 factories moved to China and Mexico. 20 million jobs, 15,000 factories, 20 million jobs. So anyhow, Biden is doing something about this. 100% tariff on the cars. He raised the tariff on lithium batteries from 7.5% to 25%, from 0 to 25% on critical minerals, from 25 to 50% on solar cells, and from 25 to 50% on semiconductors. On aluminum, steel, and personal protective equipment, the tariffs went from 0 to 25%. So I see this as a good thing. The Citizens Trade Campaign released this notice. These tariff increases will help prevent cheap imports, which are all too often made with forced labor, sweatshop labor, or under other unfair conditions, from undercutting quality jobs and sustainable development at home and around the world. Diverse supply chains are critical to a rapid clean energy transition. As such, the Biden administration's latest efforts to fight the monopolization of clean energy technologies, by China, is the right move for working people and the planet. Allowing any single country or region to dominate the production of clean energies like EVs, batteries, and solars will eventually lead to higher prices, increased supply chain disruptions, stifled innovation, and a fracturing of the coalitions we need for ambitious climate action. And, basically Joe Biden is doing it. He's doing it. But the Republicans have a plan. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break to take down people like Sherrod Brown. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
27 minutes past the hour of that story, and your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon. But why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. I had a quick story here for you. Conservative outside groups dropped $70 million on Senate Democrats in battlegrounds. This is amazing. $70 million in 5 key battleground states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. They're going against Democratic senators in those states. Sherrod Brown in Ohio is probably at the top of the list. The group is starting with, in Ohio, with a $28.6 million ad buy, an $18.6 million ad buy in Pennsylvania, $17 million group of ads in Montana. The group is called One Nation. And, they want to make America just one Republican-controlled nation, I guess. And as Steve Daines, the chairman of the National Republican Study or Senate Committee, I guess, he said, we're at cash on hand in disadvantage in virtually every race, except that these dark money groups are coming in and pouring, in this case, $70 million into these races against Democrats. Meanwhile, in Alabama, the Mercedes, the car manufacturer, the German car manufacturer, which is entirely unionized in Germany. In fact, half of the board of directors of Mercedes is made up of employees of Mercedes who are union members. Under the German law, any company that has over 2,000 employees must have 50% of its board of directors made up of union workers. Think about that in America, right? You'd see a very different business landscape in America. You wouldn't see CEOs, getting richer than pharaohs. You wouldn't see, massive corporate, massive stock buybacks just to make executives rich. But anyhow, 5,200 employees of Mercedes-Benz in Alabama are voting today. Well, this entire week, Monday through Friday, this week. We'll know on Saturday or Sunday how the vote turned out. By next Monday, certainly we'll know. And Kay Ivey, the Republican governor of the state, Republican members of Congress, of the state Congress in Alabama are coming out and saying, don't vote for this. Be very careful. By the way, the UAW has filed multiple union busting complaints against Mercedes with the National Labor Relations Board. One of the workers there said, and I quote, "It's a daily barrage of text messages, emails, and there's an app we have for work for every kind of announcement you can think of. And we're getting 2 or 3 notifications daily. Every time before the shift, we have to sit in the team room and watch anti-union videos. It's just a constant barrage. Everybody is just sick and tired of it." Very interesting. You know, is this? Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll know next week. And I think that's the kind of thing that, I mean, keep in mind, you know, for decades, it's been impossible to unionize in the South. And now they're doing it. I mean, we'll see, but I think it's going to work. After all, it did in Tennessee a couple weeks ago. So what's on your mind? Let's pick up your calls here. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
So the Dobbs decision, which allows states to impose their values upon women's reproductive rights, and some pretty screwy laws in Arizona, and now this one in Alabama, which is going to require women to register their pregnancies, makes me think a couple things. First of all, well, for instance, what would you be registering? I'm going to use some right-wing lingo here to make so that they will listen to this. Is a fetus not only unborn but also an undocumented occupant of Jane Doe? What is the status? What is the status of this? What is the status?
An illegal immigrant.
Well, okay, that's fine, because if you're going to what they have done is they've induced personhood upon a fetus. So, in other words, the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment say that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Well, so the fetus now has more due process than the woman.
That's correct.
So, in other words, the party in question, the fetus, is that a person? Well, by applying the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, you've induced personhood upon the fetus. So, in order to test that, have to get this back in court and make these courts say, no, it's not a person. First thing to do is, well, first of all, constitutionally, we should be counting all fetuses during a census year, because the Constitution requires that we count all persons.
Oh,
okay.
Interesting.
The next thing,
yeah.
Well, you have to.
Yeah.
And if you're pregnant, of course, this will be great for Democrats, because by far more pregnancies in urban areas, which are predominantly Democrats. Okay, and so on your income taxes, if you are pregnant, and say if you became pregnant in 2024, but you're not due to deliver until 2025, claim that as an exemption, as a dependent right now, this year.
Yeah.
And make the courts, another thing you could do at a lower level is drive in the carpool lane and say, I have 2 people. Let them laugh, but say, no, this is 2 people.
There has actually been 2 different women who've been arrested for that in different states in the last year.
Great. And they should be saying it's a person.
Yeah.
And
well, that's what they said, but they got tickets anyway.
They won't be arrested, but fight the tickets and make the courts say that's not a person.
Yeah.
And the reason I thought of this is because there was a case in 2013 in Canyon City, Colorado. A woman who was 7.5 months pregnant with twins came into St. Thomas Aquinas Hospital, Catholic hospital. She had had a heart attack because she had super high gestational hypertension. She had a heart attack. She subsequently died of her cardiac incident, and her husband sued the hospital saying they should have saved the fetuses. And the lawyers for this Catholic hospital said no, because the fetuses are not persons.
Yeah.
And they won.
Wow.
Now, that's a Catholic hospital saying, this is the Catholic Church says that they're the pro-life, and that the lawyers for the hospital said they're not persons. Now, if I were them, I would have argued they're persons maybe, but they're not our patient. The woman was our patient, and we cannot sacrifice a patient to save potentially what would be other patients. That
actually would make more sense. But even the word patient implies a personhood of some sort.
Well, yeah, but and so that goes back to who are the fetuses, other than undocumented occupants of Jane Doe.
Yep. Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, thank you, Paul, for illuminating the bizarre logic of Republican world. It's a good one. It's always nice to hear from you. Thank you. Sean in Britain, South Dakota. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was listening yesterday and didn't have a chance to call in and talk about credit card usury.
Yeah, most people don't even know what that word means. You want to give us a quick definition, or shall I?
You go ahead.
Usury is biblical. In the Bible, you're forbidden from charging interest, and for a long, long time in the United States, I don't know when the law went into effect, but it was taken down by Richard Nixon in 1972 or 73. But we used to have a federal law that capped interest rates at 10%, or maybe it was 11%. And it was called a usury law. Usury is exploiting people by charging obscenely high levels of interest. And once that law was done away with, it was just open season on the American people by the banks and credit card companies. Back to you.
Okay, so many years ago, just as that law was changing, I had a Mervyn's credit card at the aforementioned rate. And I got a letter from Mervyn's stating that they were raising my interest rates, not because I'd missed a payment or was even late, but because at that time I didn't own real property. And I called the customer service line and said, define this. And they said, well, you're not a homeowner, so we can raise your interest rate. And they took my interest rate up. I don't remember what the exact rate was, but it was shocking. It was twice as high as it had been.
Right.
And so I paid off my balance, which I was in the habit of doing anyway. So it wasn't a hardship for me. And I had them cancel my credit card and send me a verification letter that I had indeed canceled my credit card. And the next thing you know, I had 5 credit cards in total, and all of them, because of the letter that Mervyn sent me, raised my interest rate to the same amount.
Right, because they can.
Because
Thank
they
you, Richard
can,
Nixon.
and that was their logic.
Yeah.
I was penalized because the law allowed them to engage in usury.
Exactly.
And so what I want to say about that is I canceled all of my credit cards, and for more than 2 decades, I have been living without credit cards. It hasn't hurt me at all.
Yeah. It can be
Consumers
inconvenient, I would imagine.
Well, I have a debit card.
Oh, okay.
And I use my debit card instead of a credit card, and I have a debit card that gives me points, so I use it to my advantage.
Yeah.
But I still try not to use the debit card if I'm going into an independently owned small business, because even the debit card, for that business to process the transaction, the business has to pay a fee to the debit card company. So
are you sure of that? Because I've seen companies that refuse to take credit cards, but they will take debit cards, and I assumed it because maybe the fees are just much lower.
I don't know how significant they are, but my son had his own business, and he had to pay a fee for every debit card he processed.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, it makes sense.
And that may be a state thing.
Yeah.
But as a consumer, I have chosen not to use credit cards at all for that very reason.
Well, I think the thing we need to do, Sean, rather than punishing ourselves, is, although I totally get what you're doing and saying, is that we need to pass usury laws in the United States again. At the cap interest at some reasonable level. 10, 12% at the very most. Sean, thank you for the call. That was a great one. Thank you so much.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Russ in White Plains, New York. Hey, Russ. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
I'm great, but I'll get better, Russ. How about you?
I'm fine, Tom. I didn't catch the first 20 minutes. I don't know if you discussed what happened with Rudy Giuliani being gagged at WABC Radio. I wanted to ask you about that. But my real question is to your question about what are we going to do if 5 years from now we've got Trump, or a year from now, what are we going to do 6 months from now? I'd like to know, do you think it's hardball if Vice President Kamala Harris sent the election back to the states on January 6, 2025, and if Trump leads in the vote, doing the same thing to Republicans, what the Republicans tried to do with Pence? And so is the 1887 law still in effect? And do you think that they could use the claim that China is using on AI on us? In other words, it's a throwback tune, you know? I mean, they used the pandemic and fear porn to have mail-in ballots and make up ad hoc rules contrary to law. And to Tyrone in the Bronx, in Harlem, I'd like to say Jamal Bowman pulled a false alarm. And I think that's kind of unconsciously indicative of what's going on with Trump.
And he paid the price for it. So Russ, in answer to your question, or multiple questions, I guess.
No, just two.
If Kamala Harris was to say we're going to throw the election back to the states, that would make Donald Trump the president, because the way it works is it gets thrown to Congress, actually, and in the House of Representatives, each state has one vote, and that one, you know, and there's 27 states that are Republican controlled and 23 that are Democratically controlled. You know, it would throw the election to Trump if that happened. With regard to, you know, changing election rules for COVID, I don't know of any of those rules that got changed that were not unreasonable. I mean, you had literally a deadly disease. It killed 1 million Americans. And so you had a number of states that said, okay, we're going to allow people to you know, get their ballots by mail and drop them off at the ballot box. People still had to verify their signatures. Signature, it's harder to fake a signature than it is to buy a fake ID. Signature matching is, you know, it's biometrics. It's solid.
Tom, can I ask you?
Multiple courts have looked at this, and you know, there was no, you know, I realize Trump and the Republicans are running around saying, oh well, you know, the reason that Biden got elected was because, you know, the rules got changed in a way that helps Democrats. No, the rules got changed in a way that just helps democracy.
Well, Tom, I'd just like to ask you, would it be reasonable to question what happened in that election? And, of course, you know,
it's always reasonable to question any election, but you know, after you've lost 60 court cases where hundreds of experts have testified, and it's gone literally all the way to the Supreme Court, and every single one of those courts has said, no, there was no fraud in this election, or at least no fraud of any consequence, no fraud that had any possibility of impacting the outcome of the election. And that you should just say, okay, great, you know, Biden's president. Let's let it go.
Okay, just one more question, Tom. You know, and I'm a lifelong Democrat who is now a Trump voter, but to me it looked like the courts wanted finality. They didn't want it dragging on like Gore versus Bush, which was, of course, decided wrongly. So, you know,
I don't think so. I think they actually looked at the arguments that were being made and found that they were all specious. I mean, you look at that movie 2,000 Mules. It's just filled with lies. It's insane. Ross, I got to run, but thank you for the call. That's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Welcome back to 51 minutes past the hour. Jose in Kylene, Texas. Hey, Jose, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, okay, Tom. So I have a question, and this is in reference to the trial with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, okay, so he's got 34 counts against him. Okay, and so I understand that if he is found not guilty on, if he's found not guilty, or it's a hung jury or whatever, that does it take only one of those counts, to throw the case back to Trump as though he won, or does he have to be found not guilty on all 34 counts?
He'd have to be found not guilty on all 34 counts for him to claim exoneration, although if there's a hung jury, which means that you've got one juror or more who are refusing to vote for conviction, if you've got a hung jury, that basically what that means is that the trial essentially never happened, and it can start all over again. The state can bring the case again. It would have to be after the election, but they can do it again. Trump would, of course, claim that he won, that he was vindicated, but it's really a hung jury is not vindication. A hung jury is a problem with a jury, or arguably a problem with the case. It depends on the situation.
So he, there's 34 counts, and
if they find him not guilty on every single one, then he has actually won. Yes.
On every last one of them.
That's correct.
But if there's one of those that he's found guilty on, then he's guilty.
That's correct. And he can go to jail. Yeah, if even one of those 34 charges is determined to be, he's found guilty on even one of them, then bingo, he pays a fine or he goes to jail or both. Jose, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Great question. Thank you. Patricia in Tuxedo, New York. Hey, Patricia, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just want to encourage people in the Democratic Party to do something proactive. Not like I do the same thing. I do complain a lot because I know a lot about what's going on, and it's really disturbing. But I am a member of our Democratic committee in our small town, and we write postcards and we make calls. I go out and I have to walk petitions, and it's all easy stuff. Mm-hmm. And we always need help. And that doesn't mean you have to give your heart and soul, like your time, but even just to give a little time, if you feel really strongly about the Democratic progressive cause, that people are needed. The Democratic Party is made up of average, ordinary people. Yeah. It's not like this big entity that we can just call on to when you have a great idea to organize something. If somebody has a good idea, like one of the callers had a lot of callers have really good ideas. If they can try to put it into action, even in a very small way, it'll be helpful because there's going to be a long road to hoe this November. From now until November.
Patricia, give our listeners a brief tutorial about how to connect with an organization or the Democratic Party or whatever to do what you're doing. How did you get to that point where you were actually walking around knocking on doors?
Well, I live in a very small town. It's Tuxedo Park, actually. Mm. And there's only like 3,600 people. So it's easy to find out who runs the Democratic Party. And, I don't even remember. I've been in it for so long, how I originally got started. But just find out who someone in the Democratic Party, some officer or even somebody that you know, there must be some way. Actually, I don't really even know because I've done it for so long. I know there's a county Democratic Party that we're a part of also, but I would just contact somebody and say, I'm available to do something. And then, like I said, there's a big opportunity to write postcards, even for people like Sherrod Brown. We're doing outreach to other people that are running for office that have a good chance of winning, and making phone calls. You can't walk a petition, though, unless you get certified, basically, to walk a petition. But
that
you could
varies
go
from
with
state to
you
state,
know, I'm in New York, but if you know somebody who is going to walk a petition and you know the area, it's great to walk with them and make contact with the people. But there's just easy things. It depends on what your local organization is doing to help. But I'm sure at this point, I would hope that all the Democratic committees all across the state are doing something. Yeah. And we always need warm bodies. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a gigantic commitment. And if you just sit around yelling at the television, that's really not helping.
Oh, and I'm telling you,
it's
I have been to a bunch of Democratic Party meetings in multiple states over the years, and the sense of community and camaraderie, it's a great social opportunity. It's better than, playing bingo. I mean, you get to know people, you develop friendships, and you're helping improve the world. I mean, you're making a better country and a better planet. Patricia, good on you. Thank you so much. Go ahead. Okay, thank you very much, Patricia, and good on you. We'll be right back on the other side of this break. Louisiana Republicans and child rapists, really?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said certain of Coke's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Koch makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program, by the way. There's a gag order, of course, on Donald Trump from attacking the judge's family or anybody else's family or pretty much anybody except the judge or the prosecutors. So Trump now has Tommy Tuberville and J.D. Vance and all these other buffoons coming to his trial and walking out and violating the gag order on his behalf. So now there's a question, will Judge Merchan hold a hearing is Trump helping set this up? Is he violating the gag order indirectly? There's just no bottom for these guys. This is so sleazy. It's just incredible. All right, speaking of sleazy, the congressman from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, is there at Trump's trial, proclaiming himself to be Moses. He says God told him to run America. He's Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's the most powerful elected Republican in the United States right now. And so, you know, on behalf of God and Jesus, he has gone to the criminal trial of a convicted rapist to argue that basically forcing himself on a woman to have sex with him and then paying her to keep quiet about it is like, you know, that's obviously what Jesus would do, right? I mean, it's just obviously what Jesus would do. So anyhow, that's kind of Louisiana in a nutshell for you, I guess, or at least Louisiana Republicans. Obviously, Louisiana Democrats are pretty good people. But down in Louisiana, there is an abortion ban that the only exception to it is to save the life of the mother. And doctors who perform illegal abortions face 15 years in prison in Louisiana. So Representative Delisha Boyd, a Democrat, I'm not sure where she's from in Louisiana, but anyhow, she introduced legislation back in February to expand that exception from just the life of the mother to the life of the mother and victims of rape and incest. Republicans said, no, we won't vote for that. And in fact, one of the Republican legislators came right out and said, this was Representative Lauren Ventrella, said, teenagers who had consensual sex might feign rape or incest in order to get access to an abortion. Right. So Representative Boyd changed her proposed amendment to the law to say, okay, we'll make an exception and allow abortions for victims of rape and incest who are under 16 years old. You know, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, whatever. And she thought that, you know, certainly that'll pass, right? And in fact, she told the story of how her own mother was raped and impregnated when she was 15 and gave birth, and the consequence of that was that she died at the age of 30. I mean, the health consequences of giving birth when you're 15 years old can be pretty dramatic. But nonetheless, it never even got out of committee. There was 7 Republicans and 4 Democrats on the committee that through which this legislation had to pass, and all 7 Republicans voted not to pass the exception for rape and incest of a 12-year-old, basically. On top of that, Republicans, but by the way, a 2023 survey found that 77% of Louisiana voters think there should be an exception for rape and incest. And majority of Louisiana voters support access to abortion up to 15 weeks. But now the anti-abortion lawmakers in Louisiana, the Republicans, are pushing for reclassifying mifepristone and misoprostol as controlled dangerous substances, putting them in the Schedule 4 drugs like opiates. And the penalty for possessing or distributing such drugs in Louisiana right now is 10 years in prison. More than 240 doctors wrote a letter to the legislature, to the Republicans in the legislature, saying these are not dangerous drugs. They are literally safer than aspirin in terms of side effects. And they've also pointed out that Louisiana is, quote, among the U.S. states with the lowest number of employed obstetricians and gynecologists in the country, with the majority of its parishes, counties, having less than 2 per 100,000 residents. But nonetheless, the Republicans in the legislature said, nah, we're going to continue doing this. We're going to try and outlaw these drugs. What wonderful people, huh? I'm wondering, you know, at what point do these red states start hemorrhaging citizens? I mean, if as a parent, if I had kids who were still in my house and were teenagers, girls in particular, I would not want to live in one of these red states. I mean, if they get raped, they still have to give birth? Are you kidding me? Anyway, In Tennessee, this is just continuing the bizarre story. Tennessee, of course, also has a ban on abortion, thanks to the Republicans in Tennessee. And Brianna Cecil, 34, got pregnant. She was 12 weeks pregnant. She went in for an ultrasound, and the doctor said, "I've got really bad news." And he showed her the fetus's brain was not attached to its spinal cord, meaning that the brain was not developing and not working, and that this fetus would probably die in utero, but if it was born, would die within seconds of being born because it didn't have the ability to breathe. So she asked her doctor, can I get an abortion? And he said, no, you can't. There are no exceptions here in Tennessee. You're going to have to give birth to this brain-dead baby. So she left the state to get an abortion. She said after sobbing to receptionists at roughly 20 clinics and hospitals around the country in a desperate effort to get an appointment, she finally had success at a hospital in Chicago. She went to Chicago. She got an abortion. She came back to Tennessee. And about a week later, she started experiencing pain and throwing a fever. And she couldn't go to the doctor that did the abortion and say, hey, I think that, something's wrong here, because it's illegal in Tennessee. So she just got sicker and sicker, and finally she showed up in the emergency room, and they had to open her up. She now has a scar from her crotch all the way up to the middle of her stomach. They had to cut her open and remove a fallopian tube and take out part of her and her right ovary and cut open her uterus, because there was apparently still some tissue left in there from the abortion. The abortion was not, a 5-star abortion, shall we say. And she now can no longer have children because of the law in Tennessee making it, so difficult. She had to go through this whole odyssey, and so she's telling her story publicly now. But this is the world that Republicans want for you and me and the women in our lives. And I would add, it's not just a women's issue. I mean, these women have parents, and they have husbands, and they have friends, and they have sisters and brothers, and these laws are affecting everybody. Obviously, the main brunt of it is the women, because this is the Republican effort to control the bodies of women. It's just that simple. Meanwhile, the ultra-processed food corporations are knocking on our door.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Trying to cram junk food down our kids' throats. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, and I'll be picking up your calls. Stay with us. And welcome back. Ed in Erie, Michigan. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. For one thing, I want to say, all us unionists are all very happy of the progress that's being made. But, if the Democrats don't take control of our government from November, all this is going to be for naught. You know what I mean? Let me start off saying that.
Yeah, the Republicans will recriminalize being a union member if they have an opportunity.
Exactly. That first. But I've made many phone calls to you, Tom, because I hired in at the Jeep plant that American Motors just bought 2 years earlier in '71. I've seen the changes from the Asian manufacturing system,
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, we've talked about that. Ed Deming's suggestions, yeah.
Yeah, and all this stuff, yeah, right. We talked about that. It was an American, but our people went over there to learn it, okay, to operate. I was in stock in an automobile factory, okay, and I was there in the labor movement when Reagan fired Patco, okay, and everything, I've lived all this. And, yeah, this is great what's going on. But, it's going to get real tough when we run up against the Asian manufacturers. Yes, okay, because they are pit bulls when it comes to unions. I'm going to tell you something, okay? I'm going to tell you something with that, okay? The Germans like you said, they got their meetings they're having and brainwashing and things. But the Asian manufacturers, they're pit bulls.
So you're saying that the Kia and Toyota and Hyundai and whatnot factories in the South will probably never be unionized? Is that your point, Ed?
No, I don't know. If that's what I mean. It all depends. If we get a good guy, if we had, a filibuster-proof Senate and our friends like Representative Pocan and Kana get on our side, yeah, we got to have the union is no more powerful than the government's going to let them be. Tom, bottom line.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just plain and simple. And like I was a union steward, which we had union stewards and then committeemen I was on the floor.
Yep.
That was what took the beat.
I know my youngest brother was a union steward with the printers union for a decade. I'm real familiar with it.
Okay, well, I was just one term I did for you. But, okay, argue with these people, guns, religion, and then are the same people with the biggest mouths complaining the most, okay, about stuff, but yet they're the ones voting Republican. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it just, like I said, but that's, like I said, you started talking about it, I get all fired up, and I've got to be careful. But like I said, I was there, I lived it, Like I said, I was brought up, I was 17 years old when I started there. I was brought up by World War II veterans in an automobile factory, okay, because those guys were all still there. My dad was there till 77,
Mm-hmm.
And when I started complaining and being the young radical, that the union guy, the committee men come to my dad, hey, we got your son, and what's he, I said, no, because my dad told me how we were losing everything, downtime, peace, where all this stuff was going, man, all of it. It just progressively, and then they started bragging, okay, yeah, let's build them here because we were taking sledgehammers to Toyotas up in Detroit. You remember that?
I owned I bought it for $35, but it was a Toyota. This was like in 1972 in Michigan. And that car got keyed at least a dozen times. I mean, if I parked in a shopping center, people would walk by and just scrape. It was an old beat-up car to begin with. But Ed, I'm out of time. I got to run. But thanks for the call. Yeah, I remember the 70s. 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. One of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. All righty. The ultra-processed food industry is Ralph Nader's got a newsletter over on Substack, but this was reprinted over on Common Dreams. He talked about how about 45 years ago at a social gathering, he asked the executive of a large food processing company if he fed his own kids the heavily sugared cereals that they were selling. And the guy said, nope. Ralph is like, yep. So anyhow, he notes it was about 1980 when obesity rates started rising at an alarming rate. And now about 30% of adults are obese, another 35% are overweight. That's 65% of all American adults struggling with their weight right now. Goldman Sachs study recently estimated that by 2028, 70 million Americans would be taking these new weight loss drugs. But Ralph Nader notes that it was also in the 1980s when the food scientists, and I put those in scare quotes, realized that if they manufactured foods that had high levels of sugar, salt, and fat, that deadly triad of food additives would cause people to become essentially addicted to those foods. And thus, hot dogs, potato chips, soft drinks, all this kind of stuff all started showing up with salt in it, with fat in it, with sugar, not necessarily soft drinks, but you get the whole thing. In 2024, the New York Times defined ultra-processed foods as, quote, using industrial methods and ingredients you wouldn't typically find in grocery stores, like high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, and concentrated proteins like soy isolate. Also flavorings, colorings, emulsifiers, etc. And this is just amazing. Ultra-processed foods, UPFs, make up 2/3 of the calories consumed by children and teenagers in the United States. Now, these are the foods that cause obesity, and now there's another study that was published last week finding that 50% of all the cancers in America are caused by or have a causal association with obesity. So being overweight isn't just, a problem for heart disease and, burning your joints out early and requiring things like knee replacements. Being overweight is also puts you at a 100% higher risk for cancer than not being overweight. And these are the foods that cause this and the addiction to these foods. The Times continued, in a large review of studies that was published in 2024, scientists reported that consuming UPFs, ultra-processed foods, was associated with 32 health problems, with the most convincing evidence for heart disease-related deaths, type 2 diabetes, and common mental health issues, including anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression from eating ultra-processed foods. I mean, because they're scrambling your body's metabolism. Our bodies run on sugar, right? Glycogen. Glucose converts to glycogen in the liver, and glycogen that's the stuff your muscles use and your brain uses. And these kinds of foods just they scramble that whole sugar processing system. Canada and Mexico both have published guidelines that say avoid these kinds of foods, these ultra-processed foods. Not so in the United States. We have no such guidelines. Why? Because 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court said that it's legal to bribe politicians. That includes people who work in federal agencies. And, they basically, the processed food industry has bought the foods that it wants. It's crazy. All righty. I was going to say what's up. Well, yeah, what's on your mind? Brad in Prattville, Alabama. Hey, Brad, what's up? What's up?
Hey, Tom, just wanted to give you guys a quick update on the library situation going on here in Alabama. Last week, we had some good news. HB 385 was died in the House and the Senate. HB 385 was a proposal to jail librarians for anything that is considered obscene by the state for having it in their libraries. It was one of the bills that was quickly written, quickly drafted, and a very poor, I think one of the, maybe a high school student or something wrote it. It was not a good bill in any way, shape, or form, but it was defeated last week.
That's good news.
Two, just to let you guys know that this is not over. They are going to go back with it. The biggest threat right now is in our local libraries. This all started, of course, about 2 years ago at Prattville, my hometown library, and it is being used as a guinea pig. But now they've moved on. Just to let some of your listeners know, if you're in Shelby County, Jefferson County, you guys need to be aware they're coming for the North Shelby Library and also up around Huntsville, Mobile, everywhere, all over our state. They're going over and taking over our local library boards. So I just want to encourage everybody, find out when your next library board meeting is, sign up to speak if you're able to, start attending your city council and county commission meetings, because eventually they are going to have all of the books taken out, which have any kind of LGBTQ themes, anything going towards the civil rights movement, and then the next marginalized group that they'll move on to.
Yeah, they basically want to erase queer and black people in particular from the intellectual landscape of our children.
Absolutely. We'll have the Gone with the Wind version of history back again, and that is all we will know about it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point too. I mean that Gone with the Wind was arguably a book that was a defense of slavery.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's incredible.
Yeah, but Roots, I remember when I was a kid, they would not show Roots in our history classes because they were afraid it would upset too many people.
Yeah, well, there was a bunch of TV stations in the South that wouldn't play it when it was on TV, too.
Yep, you're right.
Yep.
All right, have a good day, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. You too. Thanks for the update. Amazing. Alabama. Speaking of Alabama, Norma is up next. We'll pick up her call on the other side of the break. Stay with us. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the place where despair is not an option. Get active. We'll be right back. A book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmanreport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind today?
Oh, a lot of stuff. I think Michael Cohen needs to go in witness protection when this is over.
Yeah, I think he might have to. By the way, just FYI, the prosecution has said that he will be their final witness, and he's going into cross-examination this afternoon as soon as they come back from the lunch break.
Yeah, I know. I'm flipping back and forth.
Yeah.
But a couple of things. One, the guy from Prattville was talking about our libraries. Mm-hmm. That group of women who go to state to get rid of stuff they think is inappropriate has been here, and they're going after the board of the libraries, the state board. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the name, and they're trying to get them defunded.
Is this the so-called Moms for Liberty?
Something like that, yes. Mm-hmm. And so that would, once you lose the funding for the library, it's hard for them to keep the buildings open. But right. They want to remove any book that might teach a child it's okay to like people who are different, and that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But also on the union things, the state has passed a bill, I think in the Senate, that if a corporation comes here and allows a union, they will lose all of their concessions that they were given to bring their company here.
Oh, really?
And so that's a lot of them, yes.
Wow.
And there's a little program called Capital Journal that comes on in the evenings, and it also comes on Sundays at 12. But that's one way to watch what they're doing. It's more pro-Republican than being independent.
Yeah.
But I had a wreck. I got hit.
Oh, no.
And so...
Are you okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. But my poor truck, Jane, got bashed.
Oh.
And...
you named your truck Jane?
It's a plain Jane truck.
Oh, how sweet. I love it. I've got to come up with a name for my Ioniq 5. Anyhow, back to you, Norma. So you were saying.
Yeah, well, it's just a plain work truck. I ordered it, no electronics and stuff. And it's a 2013 and has about 46,000 miles on it now. But anyway... his insurance company was very good, and the truck is repaired, and I have it back now. But during the period of time I didn't have it, they sent paperwork to a rental car company here for me to get a car at no cost. Well, I couldn't have the car until I put down a deposit on a credit card, and they charged me for the card. I was still upset and didn't realize they charged the whole thing to me. And I called the insurance company, and they said they would take care of it. And they have received payment from the insurance company, but they said they cannot refund my charges for 5 to 10 working days.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
this is an incredible scam, Norma. Yeah, I got whacked with this myself just this week. Louise and I are having solar panels put on our roof, and I needed to move some money from a retirement account or an investment account into my bank account, and they took it out of my investment account on Wednesday or Thursday, and it didn't show up in my checking account until yesterday. And where was that money for those 4 days? It was called the float. The bank, either the bank or the investment company, was making money on my money.
Yes. And so you think about the millions of people who rent a car. While I was standing there, an elderly couple wanted to rent a car to take a trip. And they had to put down a $500 deposit and pay the entire rental thing immediately, which was close to $1,500.
Right.
And so if they have this deposit from everyone who rents a car and you don't get it back for 1 to 2 working weeks, work days, they are creating a massive float across the country.
Yep.
And the people who use their cards, they probably have an interest rate they don't like the rest of us, because it's usury now for everybody.
Yep.
And so this is a way for them to appear more solvent than they actually are, because they're using what I call OPM, other people's money, to do this.
You're right. And they're making money on that money.
Yes, they're making money on that, while the people are being charged money for the interest that they put on the amount they put on their card.
Yeah.
And why isn't this illegal? They also charged me something called a licensing fee to drive the vehicle and a fee for the tag.
Oh,
and when I talked to auto rental tax recovery, vehicle license fee, that was another $40.
Wow. So they're just nickel and diming you.
Yes, these are what Bernie calls
junk fees.
What was the term junk fees? Yes, and the insurance company had a fit. But it's just I still have not heard back from this rental car company as to when I will receive my credit.
Incredible.
And I've checked with my card people, and no, I have not received a credit.
Yeah, amazing.
So I think that. If you can borrow a car from somebody, or you want to keep a junk car around that you can use when you have a wreck, you'd be a lot better off.
Yeah. Well, try to avoid the wreck, too. But, yeah, I get it. Norma, thank you. It's always so nice to hear from you, and thanks for the story. I'm so glad to hear that you're okay. I mean, that was...
Yeah, well, it's just been 6 to 8 weeks of chaos here. Yeah. My neighbor's 27-year-old son took Xanax, and it was laced with fentanyl, and he died.
Oh, no.
And, yes. She's moving. She won't live in the house where he died. And so it's just, That's the second fentanyl death on the street.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns, it's so cheap to make this stuff that it's almost impossible to stop it coming into the country now. And
and
China will
tell
not
people
stop.
that if they want to help get Democrats in, ask them if they can support their parents when they lose their Social Security check, or they lose their SNAP card, or they lose their Medicare, because the Republicans want to get rid of it. Ask them, and then tell them these are the bills they're waiting on to pass.
It's a great one.
And see what kind of a shocked reaction you get.
That's a great one.
That might help.
Norma, I got to move along, but thank you so much for the call. It's always so nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Brandon in San Jose. Hey, Brandon, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
Okay, so first of all, I want to give a shout-out to Patricia. Usually I call it the one who's talking about knocking on doors and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She was spectacular.
Yeah, it's fantastic. When women get involved in politics, it's like they don't mess around.
Yeah, well, when anyone gets involved, but she's particularly good.
Absolutely. So what I'm calling, I guess the subject of what I'm calling about is, you asked a question earlier. How do you think Trump is going to try to steal the election this time?
Yeah.
And I have 5 words. The 5 words that he said at that first debate with Biden: stand back and stand by.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember this?
I do.
Moment at the debate?
To the Proud Boys, yeah, I do.
Yeah, and so that's really what I'm concerned about, is the strong-arm tactics by his followers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some isolated stories, but they weren't. I don't know if they were very common, of men in full tactical gear standing outside of a not a polling center, but those
drop box.
Drop boxes, yeah.
I was in Texas and in Arizona. We've seen reports of those things happening. And the Republicans now are trying to recruit 100,000 such people to show up at polling places all across the country. And 2 states last year, or 2 years ago in 2022, 2 red states refused to allow election monitors from the Department of Justice into their states.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the
it's incredible. It's just like these guys are clearly planning on rigging, on stealing an election. They're going to do everything they can, and we've got to be very, very vigilant. Brandon, thank you.
And on that,
go ahead.
Sure, on that subject, I would suggest there's a really good documentary made by the Midas Touch guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Against All Enemies, and it's about how a lot of these guys are former military guys.
Yeah.
And they're not messing around.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Well, we saw that. Yeah, was that the one that documented how they were using military formation to attack the Capitol?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yep, I've seen it. Brandon, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Right. Keith in Miller, South Dakota. Hey, Keith, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Well, one thing about Kristi Noem that people don't know.
Yeah, she's your governor. What's that?
Yeah. She, her horrible decisions with the reservations, because they have all these fighting Indian tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's 3 tribes that have banned her now.
Unite them. Yeah. Her horrible policies, she managed to unite them.
I think there's like 1/5 of the state where she's not welcome to go, where she can't step foot.
Well, I don't. She's in charge of it.
3 big reservations.
Yeah. They're typically fighting at each other's throats, but her horrible policies managed to unite them.
Well, I guess there's something good about the dog killing lady.
It's an little wind that blows no good.
There you go. Yeah, old Yeller is rolling over in his grave. Keith, thank you for the call. Yeah. It's nice to hear from you there in South Dakota. It's 46 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The defense, Donald Trump's defense lawyers are going to go after Michael Cohen in a few minutes, probably 20, 30 minutes, something like that, after the lunch break in New York. And welcome back. Eric in New Brussels, Texas. Hey, Eric, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Tom, how you doing? Just a long-time listener. My mother's been a long-time listener too. She turns 80 this year.
Oh, well, tell her I said hi.
Speak. I will, Mr. Tom. Thank you so much. I want to go to the where you were speaking about where all these abortion rights and everything in these certain states are being taken away. I just want a quick view on that. The women of this country are going to take over this election and going to show this country how powerful they truly are.
I think you're right.
In my opinion.
I think you're right.
In my opinion. And my second point is you had a caller about 45 or so minutes ago. He said he was a longtime Democrat, and now he's a Trump supporter. I think it's around 45 minutes ago.
Yep.
Question I want to ask these folks that switch from Democrat to Trumpers is, where is their integrity and character going?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Well,
yeah.
I don't understand. I'm retired Army. I'm a veteran. I was in the military for 22 years in the Army. Served in Afghanistan and Iraq. I just don't understand how this country has an integrity and character problem.
I'm assuming that these are people who are either afraid of or hate either queer people or black and Hispanic people, and because Donald Trump hates those people, they're going to bond themselves to Trump. I suspect that it has more to do with hate than anything else. I can't see anything else that Donald Trump offers. I mean, he said he was going to bring back our jobs. He didn't. He screwed that up. He said he was going to build infrastructure. He didn't. He screwed that up. He said he was going to solve the problem with the pandemic. He didn't. He screwed that up. We have the worst death rate in the world, over 1 million Americans dead.
Exactly.
He said he was going to support labor. He didn't. He appointed Anthony Scalia's son to be the head of the Labor Department, who went on a union-busting binge. He said he was going to protect the environment. He didn't. He put Scott Pruitt in charge of the EPA, and they ended up firing half their scientists. He said he was going to give everybody in the country a better health care system than Obamacare. He lied. He didn't do anything in that regard. In fact, he tried to just destroy Obamacare. He said he was going to protect Social Security. He didn't. I mean, it just goes on and on. The only thing that he said and that he did was tear mothers from their children, nursing mothers from their children, and trafficked those children into these phony Christian charities where over 1,000 of those children are still missing. We have no idea, were they sold into child pornography or slavery? We just don't know. Hating on Hispanics and hating on black people. He ordered Mark Milley and his defense secretary, Mark Esper, to order that U.S. troops shoot at protesters in the Black Lives Matter protest, the George Floyd protest. They both refused. But, those are the only two things that he did where he actually followed through on the things that he said, hating on black people, hating on Hispanics, and failing to defend, the LGBTQ community in any consequential way. So I have to assume that's why he's a Trump voter now.
Yeah, I just don't understand the division that the folks who are supporting him are allowing to divide. I just don't understand. I live in New Braunfels, Texas. I'm in deep red country here. Yeah. There is very few of us Democrats in this area, and they're just divide. When I go around and talk to people, I just ask them, does the man have moral fortitude?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does he have the moral fortitude to be any kind of elected official?
Yeah.
And if he doesn't have the moral fortitude, why are you even voting for a guy?
Exactly.
But they just don't have it.
Exactly.
But thank you so much for taking my call, Mr. Tom. It's a pleasure. I've been listening to you for a long time. My mother turns 80 this year. She loves you to death.
Thank you,
And you
Eric.
have a wonderful day and have a great week, sir.
Thank you. Give my best to your mom, too. Thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Mike in Marietta, Georgia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
I'm glad to be talking to a whiz in geography. You know places.
Well, I used to live in Marietta.
I live in East Cobb. And a few years ago, when Marjorie Taylor Greene first ran for Congress, I was driving around East Cobb. I saw a yard sign that said Green for Congress. I knew most of the politicians in the area. I did not know Green. So I asked a Democratic friend, what's going on? He said, Green is a Republican running for Congress. The next week, the sign was gone. And Marjorie Taylor Greene apparently picked up and moved her signs to Dalton, Georgia, Northwest Georgia, and she got elected up there.
Oh, really? She was venue shopping, or whatever you call that.
It's legal. The only question I have now is, where is her legal residence?
I don't know.
If somebody calls in and they know, fine.
Yeah.
Next one is a quick one about union busting.
Mm-hmm.
That is labor intensive. That is expensive. Most companies that want to break a union find it cost effective to subcontract that kind of work.
Right. Yeah, there's firms that do this for a living. It's $1 billion industry.
Yes, I remember reading it was either the New Yorker or the New York Times that there was one place, I think it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, that gets the majority of that business.
Mm-hmm.
They have salespeople that go all around the country going, it's a whole lot cheaper if you hire us than you hire a bunch of people and put them on your payroll. And if you can find that article, it is really darn good.
Yep. Okay.
Would you mind? Well, that's my trivia for the day.
Okay, Mike. Thank you very much. Nice to hear from you. Nice to hear from my old stomping grounds. Thank you so much. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things is you were talking about these companies that go around and they buy up apartment buildings and buy up businesses, and then they enjoy their reward by when the company goes bankrupt. And I find it to be fascinating because I always wonder, like, what happened to Toys R Us? What happened to Kmart? What happened to all these stores that I used to go to?
Private equity is what happened to them.
Yeah, private equity. And another separate note is that I've been talking to a lot of my friends lately, and the one thing I find to be very curious is that a lot of companies have Republicans that are in the CEO position. And what happens there is if somebody makes some bizarre accusation about somebody that's certainly not true, and what ends up happening is the people in charge will believe it verbatim. If they're checking it out, they just believe it verbatim because the other person is like a Republican like they are, and they just automatically just believe it. And people have lost their jobs because of false accusations.
Doesn't surprise me.
Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't, but it doesn't surprise me, Rick. You know, companies are basically little kingdoms. They can run them however they want within certain limits.
And again, let's see. Again, the name of the equity thing. What is it called again?
Private equity.
Private equity. Okay. Yeah. Thank you much. Hey, have a good day.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Good talking to you. Gar in Atlanta. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind today? Gar?
How you doing today, Tom?
Well.
I'm here.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Did you ever get a chance to look at that mud seal theory?
You know, I wrote it down. It's on my list of. I've got a list of article ideas that I work off for my articles, and it's there, but I have not looked it up yet. Gar,
everything you have talked about today has gone back to the mud seal theory.
I will look it up this afternoon.
The mud seal is that you need a lower class and a working class for the wealthy to sit on.
Yeah.
They have to have it. Okay, just like people be hating on China. China done brought 850 million people out of poverty. And they say they're spying on us. They make all our cell phones. They don't have to spy on us. They make the cell phones.
Yeah.
And people, and they don't want no war. They don't want Taiwan. All they want to do is sell us products.
Yeah, I'm not believing that. I think they very much want Taiwan, and
no, they don't need Taiwan.
Then why are they buzzing the island with F-35 or their equivalent of F-35s? Why have they surrounded the island with
military ships? When the last time China been to war with somebody? When the last time China been to war with somebody? They don't go to war.
Yeah, Gar, you're listening to Chinese propaganda.
850 million people out of poverty, and the United States of America don't want to do that. Don't want to bring people out of poverty.
Well, there is
China
that.
is a role model on how to bring people out of poverty, and homelessness is going crazy in the United States.
Yeah. So
And
would you
China is showing
like
them
to
how
have a
do it.
Chinese form of government here, where if you speak out against the government, they put you to death?
Tom, we don't want to bring people out of poverty.
Would you like to have a form of
China's
government where
doing
they
it.
put you to death
We're
when you
not
speak
bringing
out against the
people out of
government, Gar?
poverty. We got more people.
China
in
does that,
poverty.
you know. China does
But
it.
they brought 850 million people out of poverty.
Yeah. It's,
We don't want to do that.
all they did was embrace
We don't want to
capitalism,
bring
Gar.
Americans out of poverty.
Gar, I got it. Okay, you got one thing to repeat over and over. It's a good one. You know, China promotes that very heavily. We'll be back. Let's see. Oh, the GOP is lying about states' rights. Why does that matter? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. The Republican Attorneys General Association was created some years ago as a way of pulling together the right-wing law enforcement, chief law enforcement officers for all the various states. Elie Mystal, who is the justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, which has published my work in the past, great magazine, is speaking out about RAGA, the Republican Attorneys General Association. He says, they're the people who, under their own authority, can bend the law to their will and weaponize it against vulnerable communities, end quote. He said, Republicans often justify nearly every one of their awful policies with a call to states' rights. He's absolutely right. You know, I remember when I was young, you know, the whole opposition, Barry Goldwater's opposition in 1964 to the Civil Rights Act and in 65 to the Voting Rights Act was that it was a violation of states' rights. In other words, if a state wants to discriminate against black people, they should be allowed to. States, you know, they're laboratories of whatever, racism or something. Mistal, though, he says Republicans will say, for instance, that their intention is not to take away abortion rights, but merely to let the states decide. Right. He says they're lying, of course. He says there's currently 27 of them. He's Republican attorneys general. He said they include future Newsmax hosts like Kansas AG Chris Kobach, who finds his joy in suing to stop Joe Biden's student debt relief program. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody, who spends her day fighting whatever wokeness conspiracy exists in her head at any given moment. And Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who has effectively decided to make up his own immigration laws and enforce them at the point of a gun. This is not a new scam. This is a scam that goes back literally to the Civil War. But what's astonishing about it is that the Republicans continue to perpetuate it. Yes, states do have some rights, but you know, this is just beyond the pale. And I just wanted to give a tip of the hat to Elie Mystal. He's been a guest on this program. He's really good. He's a very, very smart man, and certainly a very smart lawyer, and certainly knows what he's talking about. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has fired his, or demoted, presumably, Sergei Shoigu, his defense minister, and replaced him with Andrei Belousov, who has no experience in the military and is an economist. And at first, when this was announced, a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads going, huh? You know, what's this all about? But now there seems to be kind of a consensus forming in foreign policy circles about exactly why Putin is doing this. He is trying to reconfigure the Russian economy. Now, keep in mind, the Russian economy is smaller than the economy of California. It is smaller than the economy of Texas. The Russian economy is about the size of the economy of Italy. Hillary Clinton, or Bill Clinton, once made the comment that Russia was a gas station with nuclear weapons. Most of their economy is based on selling fossil fuels. And, you know, it's a physically large country, and the way that we make maps shows them to be even larger than they actually are. But it's a physically large country, but most of Russia's land is relatively sparsely occupied. You know, I don't recall the population right off the top of my head, but it's not a monster. But they very much want to be, and now they're talking about having 30% of their federal budget be defense. Now that's substantial. It's probably in the neighborhood of what the U.S. budget is. I don't. In fact, I should probably just look that up right now. You know, what percentage of the U.S. budget is defense? And I'll let you know in just a second. But so, oh, here we go. 13%. Defense spending is 13% in the United States. So Russia wants to make it 30% of their budget. And so Putin is, and the reason why, of course, is that Putin is not just planning on taking Ukraine. He wants to go from Ukraine to Moldova and Transnistria, to Poland, to Lithuania, to Latvia, to Estonia, to Finland. I mean, you know, he's got his eyes on the rest of Europe, or at least the former Eastern European countries. He's trying to get the band back together, right? He's trying to put together the old Soviet Union. And, you know, which was Stalin putting together Catherine the Great's empire. So that's what he's got on his mind. And so now, you know, analysts say that the Kremlin is preparing Russia for years of war, specifically and over the short term against Ukraine. And this one analyst said the main takeaway is that Vladimir Putin is hunkering down for a long confrontation with the West. Not Ukraine, the West. That's Europe and the United States. And of course, he's got Donald Trump and about half the Republicans in the United States House of Representatives on his side. Putin does. The Russian language news site The Bell quoted a source as saying that Belousov, the new defense minister, who's the economist, is an eager believer in the doctrine that Russia is encircled by a ring of enemies. This analyst said the main conclusion that can be drawn from a competent civilian economist taking the helm of the defense ministry is that the Kremlin is consistently preparing for a protracted war. I'm telling you, you know, in the last hour I had, you know, Gar called from Atlanta and said, oh, you know, China doesn't want Taiwan. Yes, they do. I mean, just do a simple search on that one. But you know, the Chinese propaganda, they're out there pushing really hard, particularly on TikTok, which they own, to convince people that, oh, China's just this benevolent country and they just want to help out. That's all they want to do. Lift people out of poverty. That's what they're all about. No, if you speak out against China, you're put to death. If you're a minority in China, there's 1 million Uyghurs, right there. What's amazing is, you know, I believe Gar is a black man, and you know, if China ran America, black people would be in concentration camps. That's what they did with their minorities. So it just, you know, China, Russia, these totalitarian states, we need to recognize them for what they are. They're totalitarian states. They are countries where you have no rights, you have privileges, but you have no rights. And if you speak out, if you are an opposition politician, if you, you know, just mention Tiananmen Square in China, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. All righty, let's pick up your calls here. What's on your mind today? Peter in Lawton, Oklahoma. Hey, Peter, what's up?
I was called by my son, but what you described was Eisenhower's domino theory. That's the reason I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1967 after reading about how the communists was going to take one country at a time like a row of dominoes and taking them all. And basically, what Putin's idea is that he wants to put his tanks on the west coast of France, looking across the English Channel at Great Britain, like the Germans did in 1940.
Yep. So
I'm laughing at that. I called earlier. I've got a 50-year-old son who's struggling with the health problems due to the food, and I kind of blame his mother passed away when he was 11, so Dad had got to feed. Just bought off what it was on the store shelves to feed the two kids, trying to raise them and work and everything. And now he's suffered, the last 20 years, he just suffered diabetes, obesity, and I had to go back to work 9 years ago just to help support him because it took 2 years just to get him on Social Security.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Peter.
And he's diabetes is it's so rampant, you know, because of what we feed. My mother back 15 years ago said our healthcare system is nothing more than polite genocide. Yeah. And this idea about America having universal health care dates back, you know, to Teddy Roosevelt. Yep. I'm reading a book about Harry Truman. That was on his 1948 presidential platform.
That's right.
And of course, he got voted down by Democrats and Republicans both. Yeah. The Dixiecrats, they left because of civil rights.
Yeah.
But the deal is, I don't know how we can fix this mess or how we can convince the people to demand universal health care. It's just beyond me. I mean,
I think we start out, Peter, by pointing out to them that it's half as expensive as what we have right now, and you get better service.
Right. You go cross over to
Pretty
Canada and pay 7 to 10 times less.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got better health care, and they got a longer lifespan, and they got less obesity, and they got fewer problems. And yeah, Peter, I wish you the best, and I hope your son, can do well. I mean, there's it's a tough one. Peter, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So many people are the victims of the processed food industry in the United States, and now this corrupt healthcare industry. We'll be right back. And welcome back, Arthur in Seattle. Hey, Arthur, what's on your mind today?
Margaret Atwood. You probably need to explain that because I'm not going to go all into that.
Sure.
I fired up about the abortion thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Margaret Atwood wrote the book The Handmaid's Tale, which is about a dystopian society where the men have taken over and turned women into basically baby toaster ovens.
It's a little too close to home.
Yep.
And I know you say we should not despair, but Margaret Atwood, that's a hard thing to untangle yourself from. So I'm going to say one more thing. This is not the point of my call. I would have liked to talk to you when the coronal ejection last week. Mm-hmm. You say despair is not an option.
It's not. All despair does is paralyze you.
I know. Anyway, Margaret Atwood, Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, it's a great book. Arthur, I have to move along, but thank you very much for the call.
I know. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Good talking to you. Bill in Smoky Point, Washington. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You were asking about people moving from blue states to red states. I'm doing exactly that.
From blue states to red states?
It has nothing to do with racism. It's because Jay Inslee wants to turn me into a felon.
Into a felon. Oh, you own an AR-15, right?
I do. I've never even fired anything, but I own one.
Why?
So that's automatic.
Who are you going to shoot with it?
Nobody.
Then why own it?
I'm a member of the gun culture. I shoot in competitions.
With an AR-15?
Yes, there's lots of competitions that use AR-15s.
Huh. How about that?
In fact, the majority of long-range targets, the people are switching to the platform because it's so more accurate.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Bill, why not get a shoulder-fired missile launcher?
Because I don't want to pay the $200 transfer tax. And besides,
I mean, if you're going to have deadly weapons, go for broke. Hell, get a tank, put it in your front yard.
Tom, I was an FTD on an SSBN. I had enough firepower to destroy the planet.
Yeah, I mean that's my point. I mean, if you're gonna fetishize deadly weapons that have only one purpose, which is to kill human beings, I mean, you should just go all in. Why don't you get yourself some plutonium? You could build a bomb in your backyard.
Well, because I would get arrested for that.
Well, you're complaining that you're going to get arrested for having an AR-15. I mean, hey, if you're going to take on the government, if you want to kill a lot of people, there's a whole bunch of good ways to do that, Bill, I got to run. Thanks a lot for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a minute. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of... Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "22 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Tim in Chico, California. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey there. Wanted to talk about the IDF forces going against the World Food Kitchen and other NGOs.
Yeah.
It seemed to me to be a standard U.S. policy of counterinsurgency. I would reference the Contras in Nicaragua and
that was a crime, though, Tim.
Arena Party.
We committed a crime when we did that.
Yeah. So what the targets in El Salvador, they would go after healthcare workers, agricultural advisors,
priests,
educators,
and nuns.
Yeah. In fact, the profile included people who wore glasses because they might be intellectuals.
Yep.
So I think I understand where the IDF learned to go after civilian non-combatants.
Well, I don't think they necessarily had to get it from us. I think that kind of disgusting violence is as old as humanity, Tim.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say, and I hadn't heard anybody else say it. So
Reagan said, I don't disagree with you that Reagan set a bad example for the world. And he did it in violation of a law that was passed by Congress. I mean, Congress passed the law, and Reagan signed it, that said that he could not supply weapons to the Contras and he could not supply weapons to the death squads in El Salvador, and he went ahead and did both. And then Ollie North became a hero for it and got his own right-wing talk radio show. It's nuts.
Kors.
Yeah, it's nuts. Tim, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Dennis in White Lake, Michigan. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Well, I got to tell you, despite all the polls, I don't think Trump can win the vote. He's never won the popular vote yet.
Correct. He lost by 3 million, then he lost by 7 million.
The problem that I have is saving MAGA Mike Johnson's job, because I think that although Trump has no capability of winning the vote, he certainly has the capability of throwing the election into enough confusion that it gets thrown into the House.
Yeah.
And I don't want MAGA Mike to be in a position of power if and when that happens.
Yeah, well, that was that deal to support MAGA Mike's continued speakership. That was a one-off. That was in exchange for getting aid for Ukraine. So if Marjorie Taylor Greene or some other wackadoodle wants to come along and call to vacate the chair again, I don't think that the Democrats are going to rush to his defense.
And the second comment I want to make is, where do these supermarkets get off putting the National Enquirer out there for sale when they just admitted in open court that they're willing to print lies to subvert our elections?
Yeah. Well, it's that's called capitalism, Dennis. It makes money, and so they're going to do it. But I share your disgust.
Isn't there a moral imperative of these supermarkets?
No, if they had a moral imperative, probably 10% of the food they sell would not be on the shelves. It's the ultra-processed foods that are causing obesity and diabetes and heart disease. And they wouldn't be price gouging us either. I mean, but I get what you're saying, and And I think it's pretty astonishing. The parts of this trial that are probably not getting much publicity, that are certainly not getting covered on Fox so-called news and over on by my colleagues on Right Wing Hate Radio, are things like exactly that. The National Enquirer, they should have been prosecuted. Those are campaign contributions in kind, and campaign contributions in kind have to be declared. And when Trump cut a deal with the National Enquirer to trash talk Hillary Clinton, to trash talk Ted Cruz, to trash talk Marco Rubio, those trash talkings had value. And that value should have been considered a campaign contribution to the Trump campaign. And the fact that he refused to list them or failed to list them is a prosecutable crime. And, that and the other crime is, Trump said that he turned his business over to his kids, and now we discover that every 2 days in the White House, he's getting FedEx envelopes full of checks to sign, and he's still running his businesses out of the White House. I mean, Americans should be shocked by this stuff, Dennis.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
But sadly, it's just, oh yeah, it's Donald Trump. Everybody knows he's corrupt. He's a crook. Of course he's doing that. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements. And none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Welcome back to the last half hour of today's program. Picking up your calls here. Nicole in Houston, Texas. Hey, Nicole, what's on your mind today?
Thank you so much, Mr. Hartmann. First things first, I wanted to say that in November of 23, my aunt went to go pick up my grandmother's medicine at the pharmacy and got the sticker shock, and they couldn't understand what's going on, and I was immediately able to explain to them the donut because I listen to your show.
Well, good.
So I just had to say thank you for that. And my pushback was against that foolishness and propaganda from China that man got on your airways and spewed to your audience, which is unfortunate. And I'm going to apologize on behalf of him, because let me tell you something about that 850 million number that he keeps quoting. What he doesn't also want to acknowledge, or maybe doesn't know, is that China is having a real problem now thanks to their one-child policy, aren't they, Mr. Hartmann?
Yeah. Yeah, they're
because
aging
now
population.
the very same ministry that was responsible for enforcing that now has been tasked with enforcing a 3-child policy.
Right. You're right, Nicole.
And so what happened was you raised an entire generation of only children.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the fact that you don't just have a credit score in China, and, I'd already be in trouble in that particular place. But you also have a social score. Does that man want to have somebody tracking whether he pays his tickets, pays his bills on time, whether he can get on a train, get an Uber?
That's right. Most people don't even know about this.
Apartment?
In China, you've got a social score, and if you talk back to a ticket agent or a clerk or somebody like that, they can ding your social score. It's like a credit score here in America, only it's like, are you a good citizen, in quotes? And if you've got a lousy social score, you can't, some dating apps, you can't use dating apps. You can't get certain kinds of jobs. You can't rent certain apartments. I mean, it's a very, very, very regimented society, as you know, Nicole, and I'm impressed. I mean, very few people even know about the Chinese social score.
So I thank you, Thom Hartmann, and all your wonderful guests. I'm a young woman. I'm like in my 40s, but I promise you I know more about Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, government policy, the way we fund things, and it's because I appreciate people who are willing to take the time to explain it to us. Yeah. So God bless you. Thank you. I'm going to let you get to the next caller, but you are amazing.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much for your kind words and for the call. John in Arbor, California. Am I saying it right?
Auburn. Yeah,
Auburn. Oh, okay. I'm missing an N here.
In regards to that.
I'll fix it.
That's regarding to the previous caller and the guy who initially brought it up regarding the China, the trade difference and about Taiwan. I think China wants Taiwan not to control, although they might, but to have all the chip manufacturing.
I get all that.
And the resulting slaves, the slave labor.
Right. I think that the issue is actually bigger than that, and that is that in China, and I have some insight into this. I lived in China for about a month. I studied at the International Acupuncture Hospital in Beijing back in 1988. And in China, there is this notion that the Han Chinese, the particular race which is the majority of Chinese, are the superior, the ultimate race among humans, that they are intellectually and physically superior to everybody else on the planet. And that as a consequence of that, they have to have, because of their superiority, they have to have a particular type of government that's essentially a meritocracy, where the very smartest, brightest people become the equivalent of the emperor. So President Xi is almost like a godlike figure for many Chinese. And the thing that gives the lie to that is that Taiwan, which is also made up of Han Chinese, is a democracy. And that is sticking in the craw of the Chinese Communist Party, because what it says, and this is why they took down Hong Kong too, what it says to the Chinese people is, you may think you're racially the chosen people or whatever, the superior race, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a democracy. And so it's the democracy of Taiwan that is what China really hates. Yes, they would love to get the chip manufacturing, but they can build that. They would love to get some of the productivity and output of Taiwan, but they can build that stuff. But the democracy is what's in their face, and it's the gravel in their shoe, to use a phrase that the Chinese sometimes use.
So, Mexico is sort of a democracy, but I think the maggots want it. They don't care about our democracy. They want oligarchs.
There you go.
Thanks for being there, Tom.
Yeah, we've got that same problem here. John, thank you very much for that. Good talking to you. Robin in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi, wonderful. Okay, I wanted to respond to something you said, talking about Russia and China, and about income and about taxes. Mm-hmm. Actually, if you look at the War Resisters League chart, the percentage of our income tax is about 46% goes to the military. If you include Social Security, retirement, and social programs and so on, of course, that goes much lower down. But right. I'm just wondering whether the comparison you were making is accurate between the amount spent by Russia and the amount spent by the U.S.
Well, you can't compare income tax to budget spending because, number one, about a third of the federal government's revenue is corporate income taxes, not personal income taxes, and maybe even a little more than a third. And number two, we are in deficit spending. So we're spending $1 trillion or $2 trillion a year more than we're bringing in. So your budget percentage, if our percentage of the budget that is military spending is 13%, which is what I got when I Googled that, and the percentage of the personal income tax is 40%, You drop that down somewhat with, as you pointed out, the FICA tax, but you drop that down even more by the contribution of corporate income tax, and then you would drop that down even more by the contribution of deficit spending. And I suspect when you account for all those things, you'd probably end up with 13%.
Yeah, but what they say is it's 17%. But apart from that, let me go back on to what you were saying about Russia, which the way I look at that and look at Ukraine, it seems to me Russia wants to have, in effect, a sort of Monroe Doctrine around its country like we have around a whole continent, namely Latin America. And they need protection from NATO, and that's the big scare they have.
No, and that's the excuse that Putin has been putting out, and that's what the Russian propagandists have been saying. But, NATO has been on Russia's border for a long time, and this is not about NATO. This has nothing to do with NATO. In fact, Putin gave us 2 hours speech about 5 months ago, in which he came out and said, this has got nothing to do with NATO. He said, this is because Ukraine is not a nation. Ukraine is a historic part of Russia. The original headquarters of Russia, the original capital of Russia, was in Kyiv back in the 900s, back 1,200 years ago, and they speak a language that's very similar to Russian, and their alphabet is very similar to the Cyrillic alphabet. And therefore, they have no right to exist as an independent nation, and we're simply reclaiming a breakaway republic, which is the exact same rhetoric that China uses about Taiwan. That's really what's going on. The whole NATO thing is just a BS excuse. NATO is a defensive alliance, not an offensive alliance. NATO does not represent a threat to Russia. NATO would be used to stop Russia if Russia was to pull the same trick that Hitler did, attacking other countries. But NATO does not represent a threat to Russia.
But, John, I think we're going to keep going. This war will go on forever unless we, the more powerful player in this whole thing, doesn't convince Zelensky to propose peace, because Russia
that is the Russian propaganda position, Robin. They're promoting that really hard on Facebook and on Twitter right now in the United States, suggesting to Americans that Zelensky should say to Russia, okay, yes, you took 25% of my country, and I'm just going to give that to you now. Everything is fine. Please don't beat me up anymore. And, of course, I will trust you not to bomb me anymore if I give you everything that you've already claimed, which is complete BS, Robin. This is Russian propaganda that you are reciting right now.
But, John, is there no position for diplomacy here?
Not when you're under attack. We did not try to engage in diplomacy with Hitler when we got into World War II. We did not try to engage in diplomacy with Tojo in Japan. We defeated them. And Ukraine needs to defeat Russia. And they have the means to do that if they get enough help from us and the rest of the world. The reason why Russia has been able to make as many advances as they have in the last few weeks is because Republicans in Congress, listening to the same Russian propaganda that you're reciting here, Robin, Republicans in Congress withheld for 1.5 years U.S. aid to Ukraine. And that drained them of their weaponry to the point that they could not defend themselves against Russia. And they, yes, we passed the legislation, but we have not yet been able to physically get those weapons to Ukraine. But Ukraine can hold off Russia, and Ukraine can push Russia back out again. In fact, there was an assessment by the U.S. intelligence community that was published this morning in the Financial Times talking about exactly that we believe that the U.S. intelligence community now believes that Russia can be successfully pushed out of Ukraine with U.S. and European aid, which they are now getting. Robin, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's just astonishing to me how successful the Russian and Chinese propaganda efforts have been in the United States. Isn't it amazing? And welcome back. Carol in Seattle. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So the book is Holding It Together, How Women Became America's Safety Net I think it's Dr. or Jessica Calarco, Calarco.
Okay.
And it is amazing. She did an over the weekend interview, and it dovetails perfectly with momsrising.org. It's all the stuff that we need right now.
You want to give me a quick summary, Carol?
Yeah, basically how we pushed women back into the home, and then how we became free labor, and how that trickles out over, the whole
Is this post-World War II?
I think it kind of starts there, but there's another chunk of it. You think about just how much we've lost as women,
Yeah.
Even since 73, we've all lost since 73. So let's put that all together, So I feel like they're actually getting things done, both, the Moms Rising, but this is sort of like a nuanced view into like it's the answer to the Moms for Liberty stuff, because it just dispels every myth. And it really goes in there, kind of anti-handmaiden.
Are the Moms for Liberty? I thought the Moms for Liberty thing was hating on queer people and black people. I didn't realize that they were an anti-woman group as well.
I feel like they are. I feel like they're brainwashed too. So let's just try to.
They may be anti-abortion. I don't know. I just. I guess I'm not that much of a scholar.
You should want to stay at home in your kitchen. You should want to stay at home in your kitchen and whisper and be pretty and perfect and all these things go with it,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
That's a real woman, right? That's what they're trying to sell us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just like,
Okay, so
right. Well,
Holding It Together is the book. I'll have to check it out. Carol, thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
My pleasure. Good talking to you. Thank you. Michael in Fairview, Michigan. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. How are you today, sir?
I am fine. What's up? What's on your mind?
Well, I just heard a conversation about and the tariffs that President Biden is thinking of. I agree with about the cars. Wouldn't that make our electric vehicles, which I'm probably in the market to get one, more expensive?
No, because what it's going to do. Well, first of all, the Chinese cars, they're starting to flood some of the markets outside of China. They're showing up in Europe. They're showing up in Africa, and the Chinese government is subsidizing the manufacture of these cars because they want to own that marketplace ultimately. And so the concern is that they would just damage the U.S. auto industry. But it's not going to drive up the price. It would prevent a lower priced product from coming in. I mean, we've seen this with electronics, for example. We've seen this with a lot of different products where, the low cost products in the United States are coming from China because China is subsidizing the manufacture. So you could argue, I suppose, that it's going to keep electric vehicle prices high, as it were. But I think the main thing that's going to blow that up is competition. Electric vehicles are easier to make. They have fewer moving parts. They don't require anything close to the maintenance of a gasoline-powered and an internal combustion engine. It's just they're all around great products, and everybody is now making them. I mean, Cadillac has got a new electric vehicle. Chevy's got a new electric vehicle. I don't think there's a single car manufacturer out there that hasn't. Rolls-Royce just came out with an electric vehicle. It's $300,000, but it's an electric vehicle. So, Michael, I got to run, but I think that it's going to help the American auto industry, not hurt. Is the bottom line. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So MAGA Mike and the Republicans want a religious test for people running for public office. They want to know that you are sufficiently Christian to be worthy of being elected. Right. MAGA Mike is one of these 7 mountain evangelicals. There are 7 domains where these dominionists believe that we need to have religion completely take them over. Education, religion, family, business, government and military, arts and entertainment, and the media. Seriously. This is not what Jesus was preaching when he said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God what is God's. This is the opposite, in fact, of what Jesus was teaching. It's the opposite of Matthew 25, where Jesus said, The only way to get to heaven is by feeding the hungry, healing the sick, helping the poor. This is counter-Christian, anti-Christian, in fact. In fact, I think you could say it is the Antichrist's work. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's up?
Talk about the abortion, the top of the hour, the last hour, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
About the abortion.
Right. What about abortion?
It's almost the same as when, during slavery, the slave owner forced the female and male slaves to have sex to increase slaves.
Right. They were essentially breeding humans for profit.
Now, this time, it's like abortion and make sure that babies being born so they could increase the population, not lose the population.
Oh, yeah, you're right, Johan.
It's almost like the same thing.
Yeah, this is a big bugaboo. This is a big thing among the white supremacists, that, you know, the white population as a percentage of the American population overall has been steadily declining ever since 1965, when we changed our immigration laws and allowed, prior to 65, from 1924 until 1965, people were admitted into the United States based on race, and the racial composition in the United States was not allowed to change based, at least, or be affected by immigration. Lyndon Johnson blew that up. He changed that law, and the white supremacists are just hysterical about the fact that in the next couple of years, America is going to be a minority-majority country, or majority-minority, excuse me.
Yeah, and then the American Enterprise Institute, in Luxembourg, 1987, he also mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's happening quite a while, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't know if William F. Buckley ever got into it, but he certainly wrote in the National Review about the inherent superiority of whites and how it was important to maintain white dominance in America and all this kind of stuff. That's been pretty much the mantra of the Republicans, of conservatives anyway. I mean, it was conservative Democrats down in the South before 65, of conservatives basically ever since the Civil War. Johan, thanks for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. Tom in Mossy Head, Florida. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Well, I figured it out. I don't bounce as good as I used to.
Uh-oh. Somebody bounced you?
I fell through a roof.
Oh, no.
Yeah. One of my neighbors, she's an elderly woman, and we've been having some pretty good storms here. And she had a leak, so I got up there, not realizing that the whole section of the roof was just rotted completely out. And when I stepped on it, boom, I went right through it.
Oh, no.
And,
Are you okay?
pretty much destroyed. Well, I kind of destroyed my knee.
Oh, no.
So what I'm getting at is I'm going to have some downtime. And ever since I was in the military, I've been kind of keeping a journal, which is very hard for anybody else to read because, I got OCD plus I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, a friend of mine, she came over to help me out. And I've been going through my notes. Like I said, I've kept kind of a journal for 50 years.
Yeah, like Bob Grant.
Crazy life. Yeah. Anyway, she tried to read it. I kind of translated it for her, and she said, "You got a book here?" I go, "Oh, really?" She goes, "Yeah, because
well, there's a project for while you're healing up. Write a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I called you, I wanted to know if you got any tips on. I have no idea how to write a book.
Yeah.
If there's any book that I could buy that teaches you kind of how to put it together.
Yeah, there's a couple of magazines. The one's called The Writer, and the other's called Writer's Digest. I'd suggest that you subscribe to them. They're not particularly expensive, and you'll get a lot of useful stuff. I'm assuming they both have websites. My best advice is, start at the beginning and work toward the end, and have some idea what that beginning, middle, and end are, and then write each chapter as a letter to a friend.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That way you end up writing. It kind of reprograms your unconscious mind to write in a very conversational way.
Oh, that's interesting. And another thing, she goes, "What are you going to name it if you write the book?" I go, I'm thinking about Tag You're It. And I didn't want to step on any toes, especially yours. But,
oh, no, you have absolutely my permission. Not that you need it.
Great.
You don't need it. Titles of books, by the way, can't be copyrighted. So you could name it Gone with the Wind if you want. I mean, you know, it's the one thing you can't copyright as a title.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either until I wrote a book called Healing ADD, and this kind of sketchy shrink wrote a book with the exact same title. And I was like, he can't do that. What did he do? You know, because my book was doing really well. And it turned out, no, he could do that. Tom, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Good luck. I hope your knee feels better soon. It was good of you to try to help out your neighbor, and good luck with the book. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag your. There's so much you can do. Call your local Democratic Party and just ask them, what can I do? How can I help? You'll be amazed. Did I say tag you're it? I think I did. Okay, have a great afternoon. I'll catch up with you tomorrow. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today